Hi, it's Super Videos back at you for another video. In this video, we're going to be looking back at the sneak peek for 701 that we got, which was basically the aftermath of the Lucille death. And we're going to see if there are some Lucille death clues and whether those clues spoiled the death. And we're also going to be talking about some leaks that came out, some spoilers. So if you are not into spoilers, or if you don't know about that spoiler that came out about the Lucille death, I would recommend you not watching this. So this is your spoiler alert. Let's get right into this. So the first thing I want to point out is obviously there was blood on Rick's right side, right cheek. So that would mean that whoever the Lucille victim is must be on Rick's right side. So that eliminates Eugene, Carl, Sasha, and Aaron. Now, some of you may say that they're trying to mislead us with this. I don't think that's the case because they've already had their share of, trying to mislead us. And there was a lot of misleading factors in this sneak peek itself, but I don't think this is one of them. I think this is one of the biggest clues they gave us. And it's a ballsy move by AMC and the writers, but I'm pretty sure that this is in fact intentional. And they knew that we would catch on to that. And they did it on purpose to eliminate some people from the lineup from being potential victims. So this itself debunks the theory that was there a couple months ago with the shadow on Rick's left side. Because obviously if Negan moves to Rick's left side, then the victim's on the other side. But that's not the case because the blood is on the other side. So that kind of debunks that whole theory. The other thing I want to point out is that this also eliminates the shadow on Negan's jacket, because basically a couple months ago people were saying that they see Carl's hat on Negan's jacket, and this also debunks this theory because if the victim is on Rick's right side, can't be Carl because Carl is on the other side. So what we know now is whoever it is must be on the left-hand side of the lineup or Rick's right side. So that includes Glenn, Rosita, Daryl, Michonne, Abraham, and Maggie. Now, one thing we need to notice here is Negan's whole mini speech about his right-hand man and whether or not Rick had a right-hand man and if he killed his right-hand man. That leads me to think that the Lucille victim is probably a male. It could still be a female, but it's most likely at this point that it's definitely a male. So that eliminates Rosita, Michonne, and Maggie. So the people that remain are Glenn, Daryl, and Abraham. And to point out, all of these people are to Rick's right side. And the whole right-hand man could potentially be foreshadowing rather than, the literal meaning of it being right-hand man. But even if it is the literal meaning right-hand man, it still makes sense because Glenn, Abraham, and Daryl are all people who could be referred to as Rick's right-hand men. So I thought that was kind of cool how they have it so that both kind of makes sense. It could be literal, but it could be symbolic as well. Now, another thing I want to point out is that obviously from the looks of it in the sneak peek, the Lucille victim is very close to Rick. So that must mean that either the victim was by Rick's side or Negan moved the victim close to Rick and beat them so that they are close to Rick, so that Rick has a first row view of the beating and to make Rick even more broken, because if he has a clear view of the beating, he's going to be petrified by it and he's just not going to be able to take it, and that might break him. That's Negan's strategy. So if that's the case, then whoever it is right next to Rick. So that kind of brings the other theory back on the table. The theory is the blink, cry, breathe theory. When Negan said those things, he was looking either to his left or to his right. And initially we said that it can't be Glenn and Eugene because the far end, and this just doesn't make sense. He wouldn't do that if it's at the far end. But if Negan actually does bring the victim closer to Rick in the middle, then, this theory could potentially be right back on the table. Because if the victim is brought right beside Rick, then Maggie is definitely on the closer side as well. So when he's saying you can cry, you can breathe, when he says you can breathe, he's looking at his left side, which is definitely where Maggie would be sitting. And again, when he's saying you can blink or whatever, he's looking at the other side. So that kind of brings the theory back onto the table. The other thing I want to mention is that when Negan says, cut the boy's other eye out and feed it to his father, he is looking to his right. And if he's looking to his right, that means that Carl must definitely be on the right side, which kind of confirms that this beating is taking place from Rick's right side, if you know what I mean. If you don't understand what I mean, just kind of watch through the finale again, that last part, and look where the beating potentially took place, and you'll understand what I mean. Going back to what Negan was saying about Right Hand Man, he made it look like there is more than one death, because he says, is your right hand man, any of these fine people still breathing? And then later on, when he's dragging Rick into the RV, he says, the ones that are still breathing. And he wouldn't really say that if there's only one death, because if there's only one death, that wouldn't be a significant deal for Negan, because this beating is his ritual. And so if there's only one death out of the 11 people, if only one dies, he wouldn't make it a big deal as he did, because it does sound like the way he is saying it and his tone, it does sound like there's more than one victim. And I just think that this kind of confirms the spoilers that are out there, that there is definitely going to be 2 deaths. Now, obviously, we still don't know if it's going to be 2 Lucille deaths, one with a gun, perhaps the crossbow, or anything like that. We don't know the details of that. For now, we just know there's 2 deaths, and that's kind of confirmed, for me at least. I still have a gut feeling that we may be wrong, but I'm 90% sure that there's going to be 2 deaths. The other thing I want to mention is it does sound like it's quieter. I don't know, it may just be me, or it may just be that it's early morning and everything's quiet and everyone's shocked and stuff like that. But it looks to me like it's clear in the area and it's quiet. That potentially goes to support the theory that more than one people die. Now, one thing I want to quickly mention is that it's early morning because the birds are singing and Rick and Negan are in the RV. That kind of confirms another theory we had, where we said that Negan was shooting something in the RV. And obviously it's morning at that time. So perhaps Rick is taken by Negan to some location and Negan is messing around with him. And that was also what was in the spoilers as well, that this was going to happen, that Negan was going to break Rick even more. And it kind of makes sense, because even in the sneak peek, right after Rick says, I'm going to kill you, Negan kind of appears to think to himself, I haven't broken this man enough. I need to do more. I need to push him to his limits. So that kind of confirms that perhaps Negan takes Rick somewhere to break him even more and to get him to a place he wants him to be, to mentally break him. Going back to that last part of the sneak peek, when Negan is dragging Rick to the RV, the way the camera is panning up and down, it does look like the victim is right in front of the RV. So that goes back to support that the victim is brought closer to Rick. And potentially Abraham, because he was very close to Rick, but they could have taken Glenn or Daryl and dragged him close to Rick and beat them. So that's also possible. But the other thing I want to mention is the blanket that's there. Now, the blanket is definitely Daryl's blanket. It's the blanket that was thrown on top of Daryl in the finale. This doesn't mean that Daryl is the victim, and I'm 90% sure that it's not Daryl. But this just proves that something happens with Daryl. Daryl does something. And there's some proof to the spoilers, because they said that Daryl was going to intervene. And it does look like that's going to happen. Daryl is definitely going to intervene at some point in some way. Now, the other thing I want to mention is, do you remember the gun on Negan's waist? Now, if you go back to the sneak peek and if you look at it, we don't see that gun. Now, it might be there and we just don't see it because it's so fast, but that's just something to think about because the gun is not there. So is the gun going to be used in some form in the premiere? That's possible. Now, the last thing I want to mention is when the camera pans down and we see the gore, some people pointed out that there's a ring in the whole mess. And that ring does appear to be the ring Maggie has, and she was also wearing that in the finale. Initially, I was saying that it doesn't make sense for the ring to be there, but Now that I think about it, what if potentially that victim is Glenn? Would it make sense for Maggie to be putting that ring on their blood to mourn Glenn, and somehow as she's grieving, she's just putting it in there? That's possible, but it may still just be nothing. It does look like a ring, but it still could be nothing. But that's just something to think about as well. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll be back for another video.